Mr. Speaker, we could, if the government wants to go in the fall, amend the 6 to 3. But, Mr. Speaker, surely to heavens, the government should be amending this legislation and amending the budget to actually put the money into those uses that are going to generally benefit the vast majority of Nova Scotians. And with those comments, I will, as we're reaching this time, I will take my place.
Thank you. We've reached the moment of interruption. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I'm call for the question on Bill 36, on the amendment to Bill 36.
The question was called on the hoist amendment. Is the House ready for the question? All those in favour say aye. Aye. Countermanded nay. Nay. Motion is defeated. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, on the main motion, Mr. Speaker, I move the adjournment of the debate.
Motion to adjourn debate. Agreed?
Agreed.
Debate is adjourned.
Mr. Speaker, we have a late debate. I don't know if we're going to have that debate this evening or not. Yes, we are. Well, Mr. Speaker, I move that the House do now rise to meet again on the morrow at the hour of 9 a.m. The House will sit from 9 until 2 p.m. and the order of business will be a second reading of Bill 36, Financial Measures Act, 2003.
The House adjourned to 9 a.m. is agreed. All those in favour say aye. Countermanded nay. Motion is carried. The House adjourned. We reached the moment of interruption. The honourable member for Halifax Fairview.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For the benefit of the members present, I wish to read the motion that's on the floor tonight in the adjournment debate. It reads, "Be it resolved that the Minister of Community Services should stop making excuses and instead negotiate an end to the strike at the Regional Residential Services Society." One of the things that has disturbed me the most about the government's approach to the strike are the excuses that they're making for not dealing with it. I wouldn't mind so much if any of these excuses had substance and merit, but they don't. And Mr. Speaker, what is equally disturbing is that which excuses one hears depends on which member on that side is speaking. And over the past days and weeks, the members of the NSGEU who are on strike and the families and even some of the residents of these group homes have spoken to members on that side, and without identifying any particular member on that side, they know who they are, that they will offer different excuses. And what they all have in common is that none of them has any merit when they're examined more closely. The minister himself, the minister on whose shoulders the resolution of this strike squarely rests, says, and this is excuse number one, "I can't talk to the strikers." That minister says, you know, in essence, he would love to talk to them, but he's not allowed to. But, Mr. Speaker, let's be very clear about this. That minister can talk to the strikers if he chooses to. He is making a choice. He is making a deliberate choice not to deal with them face to face. It's a way of dehumanizing the picketers is to deal with them at some mass. They're real people with names, with homes, with families of their own. I've met one striker who's a single mother trying to get by. I've met another young man who has a young family, lives in my constituency and works in my constituency. They're just trying to get by. They're real people, real families, real homes that they're just trying to keep going. But the minister refuses to speak to them. Let's be very clear about that. It's an excuse. There is no legal or other reason why the minister can't talk to them. He simply chooses not to. The minister and the premier say, let the collective bargaining process go on. Well, that's excuse number two. The collective bargaining process is going on and it is broken down. There is nowhere else for the collective bargaining process to go. The two sides are not talking. The collective bargaining process goes on when they're back at the table, but the government refuses to put anything new on the table. And that's why it's just an excuse. as if there's some impersonal process that goes on here that somebody's not engaged in. And that leads to excuse number 3, which is equally without merit, and that is when the minister and the premier say, well, it's between the society and the union. But it's not, Mr. Speaker. And as my colleague from Sackville-Cobequid so eloquently pointed out, this government didn't mind getting involved when they choose to. They got involved with the healthcare bargaining units in Bill 68, even though they were not the direct employers then either. They brought this legislature together and sat them here for 24 hours because that government decided that they wanted to get involved there. And this time they say, oh, they can't get involved because they're not the employer. Mr. Speaker, there's no merit to that excuse because everybody knows the government funds the society 100%. The society has no other source of funds. If the minister won't put any extra money on the table, then there is nothing to discuss. There is nothing to discuss at the bargaining table. It is between this government and the workers who are on strike. Another excuse, Mr. Speaker, and probably the cruelest one that I've heard, but it was only stated in a private meeting with the families. I won't identify the MLA who said it, because it was a private meeting, but I do think it needs to be said, because this is what the MLAs are telling their constituents, and it is simply not true. In fact, not only is it not true, it's cruel. And what it is saying that if the strikers get what they want, the number of spaces in the group homes will have to be cut. And so what members of that government are saying to the families is that they would love to, give the strikers more money, but the threat is directly to the residents, because this excuse was given to the families, saying that if we do what the strikers want, then your relative, your son, your daughter, your nephew, your niece, your grandson, your granddaughter may no longer have a place. That is wrong. It's wrong to say it. It's wrong to make anybody believe it. It's cruel, and it should never, ever have been said in the first place. Mr. Speaker, this minister says, here's the excuse number 5. Well, he went to Simpson Hall, and he thinks that they're being well looked after. But what the minister forgets to say is that he went to Simpson's Hall in the very, very early stages of the strike when there were, I'm told, 3 people there. There are now many more than 3. How many people are there now? 30. There's about 30. 30 double bunked in rooms for people who have issues where that's not an appropriate arrangement. The minister went when there were 3 people at Simpson Hall, and not only that, but I'm told, and have no reason to doubt, that when the minister went to Simpson Hall, those 3 residents were still under the care of bargaining unit members. They were still receiving the care of the people who are now out on strike. So the minister goes to Simpson Hall and says, I personally have visited this place where 30 people are now, and everything looked fine to me. Well, has the minister been back? Has the minister been back today? Is the minister back yesterday? Does he plan to go tomorrow? I think, Mr. Speaker, that he would see a very different situation at Simpson Hall if he were to do that, Mr. Speaker. The final excuse that the minister uses is that it would cost over $100 million to settle this strike. Now, the minister knows that's not true, but he says it. He said it repeatedly in this House. He said it repeatedly in this House because the minister knows and I knows that this bargaining unit, settling the issue with this bargaining unit, even giving them everything they want, would cost about $1.5 million a year. But the minister refuses to state that fact. He says over $100 million because there's 40 other bargaining units that would expect and demand exactly the same thing. But the minister has never given us any evidence of that. He's never backed that up by saying which bargaining units he believed would ask for the same thing. He's never indicated why it is that he believes that the jobs of Local 66 are exactly the same as those other bargaining units, why the other bargaining units, whoever they may be, because they've never been identified, why they would reasonably expect to get the same settlement. The minister wants people to believe that this is a $100 million problem, but it's not. It's just an excuse. The other day, Mr. Speaker, when I stood up in this House and spoke about Stephen and Stephen's mother, I referred to the fact that I asked Stephen's mother, one of the group home residents, What would you say to the minister if you had a chance to stand up in the legislature? And her message then and her message now is get to work, get busy, get to the bargaining table. This is not being resolved when nobody is talking. That minister has a responsibility to settle this dispute. And the excuses that he and his colleagues have offered are not good enough. There are things, concrete things that minister can do, and he can do them right away. He can do them today. He can do them tomorrow. He can appoint a mediator, somebody with real authority. He can authorize binding arbitration. Let's remember the thing about binding arbitration is that if the minister is right, he'll win. So what's he afraid of? What the minister is afraid of is that he's wrong. He is afraid that the arbitrator will see through the excuses that this government has offered and will give the strikers a just and fair settlement. That's what the minister is afraid of.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and appreciate the chance to get up here and spend a few minutes talking about this labor disruption with the provision of services for the residents of RRSS. The NDP resolution for the debate reads, "Be it resolved that the Minister of Community Services," which would be me, "should stop making excuses and instead negotiate an end to the strike at the Regional Residential Services Society." And while the member opposite may have taken an interesting interpretation of the situation and the labor laws in the province, I would start by pointing out, Mr. Speaker, as has been done a number of times in this chamber and indeed outside this chamber, that this is a disagreement between an employer, which is funded as part of a sector by the Department of Community Services, but they are the employer, and they have a union, Mr. Speaker, and their negotiations clearly are between them and their union. So, it would not be appropriate for third parties to be interjecting themselves in these negotiations. We are disappointed that agreement could not be reached between the employer and union in this case. We do understand that this is difficult for both the residents and their families, and the member opposite has correctly pointed out that I have been out and I've met not only with some of the residents, but I've also met with the families as best as I could when they asked me to meet with them. It is not possible for me to be meeting with the parties that are involved with the negotiations. That could be easily perceived as interfering with the collective bargaining process. And Mr. Speaker, I would suggest that as a former Minister of Labour, I have some appreciation of the sensitivities in that area, and I am trying to respect them. We are also aware, Mr. Speaker, that the care providers, the counsellors, are very committed to the residents. There's no question about that, and in fact, they almost form a surrogate family for them. So the residents are blessed, hopefully, with their natural family, and plus they have their acquired family, which is made up of the counsellors and the other people that are there to care for them. And that makes it very difficult, not only for the residents, it makes it difficult for the families, and it makes it difficult for the counsellors. And the counsellors also, I know, have a great deal of trouble with the idea of withdrawing their services because they miss the residents. I would say, Mr. Speaker, that when we standardized the services across the province and we brought in a geographic wage parity, that this government is now spending $28 million more every year to fund the wages and salaries of the counsellors and the other people involved in delivering those services, as they do so very well to the counsellors. Mr. Speaker, that is a substantial amount of money, and in fact, over the last 5 or 6 years, the amount of money that's gone into community supports for adults has in fact doubled, and with a good portion of that going to wages. The purpose of setting the standards, Mr. Speaker, was an attempt to provide a uniform level of care for all the residents across the province, and with that, the training requirements of the counselors in some cases needed to be upgraded to take some community college courses, and based on the expectations on those counselors and the responsibilities that they carry out, $13.70 an hour was chosen as the wage which was appropriate for the sector, and there's 378 different service providers scattered across the province. RRSS happens to be the largest one in the province. And they are all getting the same level of support from the Department of Community Services. And with the additional monies, Mr. Speaker, that have been put on the table, that would take the package, which includes the 2, and 2, which has been recommended as a benchmark across government-funded agencies and other organizations, and the civil service, plus an enhanced benefits package and a pension plan. With that, it would take the base wage to one which in fact, compares rather favorably with the other maritime provinces. It is proposed that it would be about 12% more than what comparable councillors are paid on Prince Edward Island, and 18% more than their counterparts in New Brunswick. So, Mr. Speaker, I would suggest that this government has recognized the wonderful contribution made by all the service providers and the councillors in this sector, and that we have funded them accordingly, and that I suspect that my counterparts in New Brunswick and PEI are probably having to deal with the question as to why Nova Scotia values its councillors to a degree that would be difficult for them to match. And I'm not trying to make life difficult for them, but I think it is important to bring some perspective to this, that as a region, it would appear that we are more than competitive, and we do recognize the importance of the wonderful work that is done by the employees that care for the residents. The current wage, Mr. Speaker, works out to $28,500. That's the amount that's allocated per FTE. That's a full-time equivalent. And every resident is assessed for what is required to properly care for them. And with that, a formula is made up using that as the cost of a counselor, and accordingly, individual plans are made up for them and their service provider, and in this case we're talking about RRSS, which stands for Regional Residential Services Society, is provided with that per diem to care for the residents. And the funding for the increase in this package was included with this year's estimates. It was substantial. During the debate and the estimates, it was by far and away the largest increase in the Department of Community Services budgets at $12.8 million, and that is there. I'm advised that the NSGEU was asking for a 33.5% increase, and I think in view of the fact of the very substantial increase that has just been put into this sector, and trying to put an appropriate valuation on the services that are provided by the councillors, and that this had been done with the sector, that an additional 33.5% over 3 years is a very substantial ask, and that the monies that have been allocated to fund this sector, not only RRSS, are substantial, They compare very well with the other provinces, the other maritime provinces. I would point out, Mr. Speaker, that in fact this offer has been deemed to be acceptable to other unions and other service providers. The government's concern during the strike interruption is about the residents and the families and trying to help them cope during the labor disruption, and that as minister and my staff were briefed regularly on what is going on with the contingency plan, and care coordinators from the Department of Community Services have visited all sites. They're meeting with families and have taken residents home to discuss specific concerns and to offer support during the strike. We're doing all that we can, Mr. Speaker, to try to make this as easy as possible on the residents and the families. And I thank you for this opportunity to speak this evening.
The honourable member for Cape Breton Nova.
Mr. Speaker, I've listened with interest to the minister's remarks. I don't agree with him. The wage that he cited, I think it was $28,000 a year. If you translate that into a 40-hour work week, it comes out to $548 a week gross, from which income tax, Canada pension, EI, other deductions are taken. What the net pay on that would be would vary from person to person depending on their marital status and so forth. But I can't see it translating into much over $325 a week net, if that. Now, you know, I've listened to what he's saying and comparing what's paid here with what's paid in Prince Edward Island and what's paid in New Brunswick. And I don't know if I've ever said this to the House, but my family's from Prince Edward Island, and I've lived there. And I know that if you live in the island, you get less than you get if you live in Alberta or in Ontario or in Quebec. That's just the way it is. And people who live in the island know that and accept that, and they don't expect to get Toronto level of wages. But this isn't Prince Edward Island here, and it's not a fair comparison to make. To take Canada's smallest and poorest province and say, well, we're doing better than they are, good for us, vote for us. You know, that's not the comparison that people who work in this city make. They compare themselves as one of Canada's leading communities with other leading communities in Canada and say, well, you know, it costs just as much to live here as it does to live in Edmonton or it does to live in Winnipeg or in Saskatoon, I would think. Now, we've heard from the minister crying poor month, you know, dear, dear, but we can't afford it. We're doing all we can to help the families, etc. But at the bottom line, the government has said repeatedly it does not have 1 cent to advance above and beyond what they've proposed in their budget. And Mr. Speaker, anyone who's familiar with the process of collective bargaining will know that a union going into labor negotiations sets a target. I'm not saying it's always achieved, but they set a target to try to bargain towards. That's the nature of the process. If you study it in university and a course in labor economics at the undergraduate level, you'll learn that, probably in chapter 2 or something. You know, you don't have to go to chapter 18 like they do in the Blue Book to find something they actually did. You find it right up front. So I would explain the union's position from that point of view, that that's simply a target. And gosh, I mean, in the next upcoming election, I see the minister's gone now, they would have a target across that way of winning every seat in the province.
Please, the honourable member knows you not to acknowledge the presence or absence of a member.
I don't recall that. Oh, forgive me. I forgot about that.
Thank
That
you.
was
The honourable member for Cape Breton Nova has the floor.
not what, yeah, all right. They want to win every seat in the province. I suppose that's the target. That's why they run 52 candidates. Do they actually achieve the target? Probably not. You know, it's been rare in Canadian history. It was done in PEI in 36, and maybe under Joe Ghiz once in PEI, although I think there was one Tory in one of his assemblies and a few more in the others. Pat Miller was the one Tory they had. What? All right, Frank McKenna, New Brunswick, but it's rare. That's the point. It's rare. And they're probably not going to elect all 52 candidates in the next election, but they'll run 52 candidates and try for that. You know, so what's fair for them is fair for somebody else to say, well, we're going to try to get wages equal to what's paid in Regina or what's paid in Victoria, BC. It's fair. It doesn't always happen, just like getting 52 seats out of 52 doesn't always happen. But you've got to allow people in a free country to have objectives towards which they try to work. So I don't know what the argument is there. But the big argument, as I see it from the government's point of view, is that they haven't got the money. Now, on the one hand, they're painting a picture with pamphlets like that in every mailbox. Lower taxes, a stronger economy, Nova Scotia, let's keep growing, and we're doing so good. And they've got bar graphs and all these fine things to illustrate that point. I table it. It's a document. Table it. Yeah.
Nova's floor.
They run ads in the paper like this nice ad that I propose to table. And the ad says, on April 3rd, the Nova Scotia government introduced a budget that includes a 3-year plan to put more money into health. Now, isn't this health what we're talking about here? Yes. Health. It's indicated by a red cross, but that means health. It's like hieroglyphics. If you can read hieroglyphics, you can read the Tory ad. Now, it also includes a plan to help working people in Nova Scotia through lower taxes. Your personal income tax will be down by 10%. In the meantime, if you pay Nova Scotia income tax, you will receive a $155 taxpayer refund mailed directly to your house in late June. Nova Scotia Department of Finance. Table that. Now, I don't question the truthfulness of that ad. I think it tells it the way it is. They got money. They're going to give you some. $155 in late June. Hey? How can they have that kind of money totaling $85 million on the one hand and have no money, not one penny, for this service on the other? It's inconsistent. It's like their new math that I lauded the Minister of Finance for earlier today, proposing to be made Nova Scotia's #1 new mathematician because of his new discovery. Like Einstein's theory of relativity explained the universe, E equals mc squared. Well, E equals mc squared over there has discovered how subtraction and subtraction and subtraction to the very bottom of the barrel equals balance, equals a surplus, equals mathematical totality, I guess. Hey? He's made that discovery, and I commend him for it, but I still would like to see how it works. Mr. Speaker, here is an example of how it works in practice. They balanced the budget, they say, for the first time in 40 years. Where is the evidence? Why is there no money to pay for those things that are needed? Why do we have such a state of chaos as this legislature has met within, with people all around the outside upset and making statements and hanging balloons that floated, by the way, unlike the balanced budget. The balloons floated. They were up, not down, you know? And it goes on. And the government doesn't seem to care. And they're planning for an election anyway. And, you know, I don't know who they're trying to fool. They're not fooling the press. I have here an item from the Chronic Herald of April the 6th, and the heading is, "Poorest won't see any of the $155 rebate." Let me table this one. 2 copies there, one for the Speaker for the table and one for the government. All right. And it points out that, you know, with all their generosity, they have no money for the poorest, the ones that need it the most. In other words, their government is a demonstration in action of the old saying that the rich shall get richer and the poor shall get poorer. There we have it, the new math, the new Tory math. And Mr. Speaker, I don't know what more I can say on this except shame on them. I mean, this is terrible. Now, we were the government not too long ago. I thought we were a pretty good government, but we weren't the perfect government, because you won't find a perfect government in this world in which we live. The perfect world ain't here. Now, well, some say it's up that way, but I haven't been up there yet, so I can't report back to you. But let me say that when we were in government, we too had to face our lumps. We too had strikes. We too had labor problems, but we solved them. And that is what I would call on the government to do here, this government. You know, And it takes more flexibility than to say, nothing we can do. We walk away, not our concern. It's a private employer over there. Go see them. When you are the sole sponsor of the employer, that makes you directly responsible. I'm sure that anyone who studies the laws of cause and effect will realize that. Realize that. Now, here comes the former Minister of Community Services. I'm glad to see his interest here tonight. No harm in welcoming someone. So, let me say, Mr. Speaker, without prolonging the debate, because the clock is rapidly approaching the hour of conclusion at 6:30, that I think they could do better. Binding arbitration, I do support that suggestion. Yes, it would work. They have nothing to lose except possibly losing the arbitration. I would say let them do better than they have done to this point. Thank you.
Thank you, all members taking part in the debate this evening. We're adjourned to 9 a.m.